You should be able to do the migrations faster. By user brainwave CC. Early on in my career, I ended up managing a pretty major project in our department of over 100 users. We were upgrading everyone from Windows 3.1 to Windows for Workgroup 3.11 on new hardware. I was averaging about 3 minutes for user migrations per day, but for some reason, my boss felt that was slow. Here's the high-level process that was used for migrating the users. Steps 1 and 2 were being conducted at my leisure, but I needed an uninterrupted block of 75 minutes, 90 minutes per user to complete steps 4 and 5 for them. I basically blocked out 2 hours per user to account for getting over to their area with the new machine, any little overhead in the process, and buffered time to handle any other responsibilities that might come up. All of this was happening in a regular 8-hour business day. Occasionally, I could manage 5 migrations in a day by migrating 2 users in the same area at the same time, but mostly I tried not to take out whole teams at once. For whatever reason, my boss was sure that they could be done faster. I can't see why it takes more than an hour to complete a migration, he said. Repeatedly. No matter how I outlined the process to him, he kept up the second guessing. He continued the passive-aggressive nagging for about 3 weeks into the project, when I was just about halfway through the migrations. One Monday, he suffered hardware failure on his primary desktop and decided that this was a good time to upgrade to his new machine and that he would do it himself. He sort of spun this as me not having to stop the migrations to deal with him, but I also suspect that he relished the opportunity to prove that it could be done faster. Okay, it worked for me. Now, in fairness, he and I were already running a different configuration from everyone else in the department. At the time, he and I were running Windows NT 3.51, and our 2 machines were being backed up to tape alongside the critical servers in our department. This is very pertinent to the saga. On his first attempt at installing Windows NT 3.51 on his desktop, he ran into a couple of snags which consumed considerable time, and which I helped him with in between staff migrations. Thus, he lost all of Monday with the hardware failure itself, plus getting to the place of deciding to do the build, and then learning about the need for the floppy. Issue #1. Tuesday was consumed with doing the install to the wrong folder, running into the initial issues with trying to restore, and starting a new clean install. Late on Tuesday evening, the tape restorer was kicked off to restore that data back over the machine. Issue #2. Now, we were using a nice backup solution that was prioritized for backup performance, not restore performance. A full backup over the network took about 4 or 5 hours. The restore, however, took till the 20 hours. So there goes Wednesday, pretty much. Late afternoon on Wednesday, he rebooted to find that a few configurations from the apps were stored different in the backups that he expected. He was mostly fine, but he went home preparing for more tweaking on Thursday. I also got a lot of questions from him about what exactly was part of the backup process and where exactly did each app store its files. By Thursday evening, he was good. Meanwhile, I averaged about 3 migrations per day that week because, well, I had to start checking in on him more each day. On Friday, just before departure time, when he asked how many migrations I had done that week, the number was 17. He made no comment this time. Thankfully, even though his experience with his personal restore was actually more complex than the migrations I was doing, it seems like he accepted the fact that things were not as simple as they had imagined they would be. And he was grateful for my assistance. And never again did he question me about migrating only 3 minutes 4 users per day, or why each migration took so long. I completed the project about 4 weeks later. We had some stragglers near the end, as you might expect with a long project where all the cooperative works go early. Once or twice a year I remember this project and I can't help but laugh each time. Our boss thought I should be able to migrate more systems per day, but he ended up taking almost a week to recover from a hardware failure on one system himself. I need all the space, by user average guy 54. Back in the last century, my workplace was a 24/7 operation with a mix of HP UX workstations and Windows PCs. The PCs were basically used for Word though, as literally everything else was done on the HP boxes. Then came Outlook. Everyone was getting their own email, and I had the job of installing it on all the PCs. First PC install failed. Second PC also failed due to insufficient disk space. Third, fourth, fifth, and sixth ditto. Those PCs had 100 MB disks. They should have had lots of space for Outlook. Why didn't they? A quick check revealed dozens of ZIP files with names like Famous6C8 or Wrigley72 in that style, and a baseball program installed on each and every PC. End result was that all the machines had less than 10 MB free space. I knew who the baseball nut in the office was, but when I went to the manager, I only said someone installed unauthorized software. Do I have your permission to delete it so I can install Outlook? He didn't ask what the software was, but did ask who did it. I replied that there was no way to know. When I deleted those files, I left a note for the baseball lad to never again do what he did. And he didn't. Internet slows down the computer by user Straße. Back in the day, I used to moonlight as personalite after work. Mostly remove viruses without losing data situations. This one was different. I get a call from an user that was referred by a previous client. The issue is described as computer gets slow when using internet. We agree on a meeting at their home. What I find there is an ancient desktop running an Athlon XP 1400 plus CPU. The user shows me the setup and it looks like he's taking proper care of his Windows XP installation, no bloat or typical user stupidity. Then we get to using internet. The user downloads/uploads files to an FTP server. The data contents are not my business, but he makes a download to show me the issue. As soon as he starts downloading, the computer starts freezing to the point where the mouse cursor is lagging. I look for what may be causing it until I notice the CPU usage. Turns out the user's internet provider has been better than expected and given him an uncapped connection. The user was downloading at over 300 Mbps, at which point the CPU simply could not keep up with the managing of data, and just handing the simple FTP download protocol would take all of its resources. The user had issues understanding what was going on because why would using internet need my CPU? However, after a while I managed to talk him into understanding he needs a new machine and I cannot solve the issue without replacing the computer. Since I didn't fix it, I didn't get paid, but it was still an interesting experience I never saw before or since, where the CPU is a bottleneck for a download. Internet slows down the computers too, by user oinky confidence. After reading Internet slows down the computer, I was reminded of 2 times over the years where businesses thought they knew best. It's always interesting to know or wonder how people think. First, we took over IT support a small regional bank around 2005. 3 locations. Upon onboarding assessment, we discovered their HQ location had 2 data drops at each station. Not too unusual on the surface. One was connected to the PCs on board NIC while the other was connected to the PCs at an NIC. Okay then, I assume one NIC went to their main/production network while the other must surely connect to a different network of LAN, maybe for their bank core processing or something. Until I dug deeper and found out they didn't all NICs connected to the same set of switches. Alright, surely they have some LAN in place, separating things out. No they don't, it's all VLAN everywhere. I asked and finally talked to someone who was around when they built the building in the 90s. Whichever IT contractor they worked with at the time told them they'd be more secure if they had a separate NIC in each PC for internet access. They thought they were accomplishing this by plugging a separate NIC into the same switch and LAN. How or why they assumed this I never found out, but thus began the process of disconnecting all the second, redundant network connections. Second, it's 2015 now and I was called to perform some upgrades at a small company involved in the farming sector. 10 PCs or so. Went there to assess what needed to be upgraded as the customer said they have old PCs and need new ones but aren't sure what. I look around and ask basic questions like what line of business apps do they have, what they have for internet service, etc. And as I ask the internet question, my contact shows me we plug this in when we need to get online, and he grabs a second Ethernet cable at his desk connected to a currently disconnected USB NIC. That network cable was plugged into their standalone cable modem in the basement, you know, the one with 4 LAN ports. I asked, does everyone have one of these? Not everyone, just the 3 of us, I was told. As it turns out, this small, family-owned company was run by a very sweet but very old lady who was so scared of internet access she insisted people plug in when they need to get online, do their thing, then unplug it. And forget about Wi-Fi. After some gentle discussion with her, I was able to convince them to include a proper firewall in the scope of their upgrades and thus eliminated the need for them to have to plug in manually every time they wanted to get online. Tales from the Dollar Facility, Part 9, Here's to Dreaming, by user Mr. Cartographer. Hello again, everyone. This is my next story from the Dollar Facility, wherein we conclude our project with Dollar and Airco. All of this is from the best of my memory along with some personal records, and I have started taking notes specifically so I can write stories for TFTS. There is also a lot that comes from rumors, gossip, and other people, but most of this is very recent, so any inaccuracies are entirely on me. Also, I don't give permission for anyone else to use this. TL/DR, I solved one problem and I only gained 7 more. Now that's progress. For some context, I'm not in IT, rather I'm a GIS Geographic Information Systems professional. This particular world is quite small, so I will do what I can to properly anonymize my tale. However, for reference, all these stories take place at my new job working as the GIS manager at the Dollar Facility, a major industrial entity in the American South. Here's my dramatis personae for this part. When last we left off, I had hired Dollar and Airco to create the entire GIS inventory for the primary campus at the Dollar Facility. We did numerous hand-ups and red flags in the time leading up, but I was hopeful that the company would get its act together and give me a deliverable I could use. After all, they had a ton of experience doing this sort of thing. One of my colleagues, Dollar Mrs. Engineer, had requested the water assets from the project first, and Dollar and Airco had assured me they'd be able to get that to me post-haste. We were already at the absolute end of the extra month I'd given them. Late that day, Dollar New Kid sent me an email with the link to a zip geodatabase ostensibly holding the output from the project we'd been working on for this past half year. Despite all the issues I'd seen, I was immensely excited. It was the first time I'd been able to pay someone else to get the hard work done, i.e., the creation of GIS data without me having to do it all by myself. I downloaded the geodatabase and zipped it and loaded it into Pro to take a look. And I was devastated by what I saw. The only GIS features within the geodatabase were direct exports of the CAD linework that had been created by Dollar Subcontractor. There were a few points here and there, but no polygon data of any sort, and probably 90% of the data were lines. The only things represented were assets that could be seen in the aerial imagery that had been captured. The other data I had provided, such as the record drawing, PDFs and CAD, DWGS, had been ignored completely. Nothing that wasn't visible on the surface was represented at all. Crucially, this meant that all the subterranean assets such as water and sewer lines, electrical wires, natural gas pipes, etc., were completely missing. Everything was in the old data model that Dollar and New Kid had originally put together, the one that had tons of nested errors/problems, not the new data model we'd worked on. And more to the point, the attribute tables for every single feature were completely blank, not one speck of data populated for literally the entire thing. Null fields as far as the eye can see. I expect that I got about 50% or so of the overall geometry from the site and literally 0% of the attribution needed. So Dollar and Airco had wound up doing about 25% of the work I had paid them for, providing that to me in this draft deliverable. That was an absolute piece of garbage. I could have just imported the crappy CAD linework from my own DWGS and gotten a better result and cut them out as the middleman. You know, I have mentioned in the past that something a contractor has provided to me was the worst GIS product I'd ever seen. Unfortunately for me, that lauded title has never stuck because the universe just keeps managing to send more contractors that perform TTY work enough to knock the last company off of the dunghill. For now, what Dollar and Airco and its ilk had gotten to me was the worst GIS product I'd ever seen. I was angry, but I was also exhausted and disheartened by all the failure I was seeing here at the Dollar Facility. It took me a few days to schedule a call with them, but I did so. On that call, Dollar Subcontractor, Dollar Ryan, and Dollar New Kid popped and all perked up, asking how I liked the draft I'd gotten them. I got right to the point. I was terse, but I was also exhausted. I had been working at the Dollar Facility for almost 2 years now. All I had come to know from my contracted firms is that they didn't know what they were doing, and that I'd have to fight with them constantly to get anything that was worth half a SHT. I was getting immensely tired of that. Anyways, I told the Dollar and Airco staff that I was extremely unimpressed with their output. Dollar Subcontractor and Dollar New Kid seemed shocked. I immediately brought up the water assets from the project, loading them on my screen in an instance of ArcGIS Pro. I showed them that all we had were a few fire hydrants and virtually nothing else. There were no water lines, valves, pumps, anything that would constitute an actual system here. How in the world did they think I could provide this information off to Mrs. Engineer for her to use to create a hydraulic model, when there was literally nothing here? Not one of them had an answer for me. We went through the whole project feature by feature, line by line. I brought up issues I saw all throughout, including their lack of reference to the other resources I'd provided and the completely blank attribute tables. Even the fields that were supposed to be filled out automatically were blank. How had they even managed to do that? Again, no answers, though Ryan insisted that he would get to the bottom of this. They would work on this and make it right. About a week later, Ryan scheduled another call. When I logged in, everyone was a lot less enthusiastic. I guess it was my fault, really, for killing the mood based on my last communication with them, but come on, people. Why can't you just do what you're paid to do? Anyways, subcontractor asked what they needed to refine and what they'd missed in the first output. We went through the entire thing again. I mentioned where they could potentially get the information in question, trying to point them to the references I provided. I left and stated that they should have done all this with me months ago. Anyways, I also was very clear at the end of the review that I wanted attribution for all this. Subcontractor replied that they'd get to that data when it became time to do so during the project. I immediately told them that I would expect a call, just like this one, where we could go over default values, attribute rules, and sources to find this data once we got to it. But subcontractor's attitude towards the attribution element was almost entirely dismissive. Because of this, before we hung up, I made sure that everyone on the call, Ryan included, knew that I wouldn't consider the project complete until I had full working attribution for all these features. All too soon, the company got back to me once more. 2 weeks later, and New Kid sent me another email saying they had a second draft of the data ready to go. They hadn't set up a time to discuss attribution with me, so I was very worried as to what I would find. I downloaded and checked the data. The geometry was much more complete. I probably had 80–90% of what I needed. But once again, as I had assumed, the attribute tables were almost entirely null. I sent yet another terse response telling them that they hadn't populated any of the attribute data, and that was the main thing I was waiting on. Ryan set up a meeting for the next day to get to the bottom of this. I made sure to make myself available. When I got on that call, I didn't even bother with pleasantries. I immediately cut to the chase. I looked at this second draft, and while the geometry is mostly complete, all of the attribution is missing once more. What is going on? Why did you not complete the attribute tables again? The main rep from subcontractor looked at me, surprise on his face, and said to me in a confused tone, Subcontractor, oh, you wanted that? We didn't think it was important. For a moment, everyone was quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. Likely due to subcontractor not realizing what they had said and Slasher everyone else not believing that they'd say something this monumentally stupid to me on a conference call like this. I sat there for a moment, jaw agape. I saw Ryan start to open his mouth to say something, but I quickly retorted out on the call. Me disgusted, I think we're done here. Ryan, I need to talk to you. Call me as soon as you get a moment. And then I closed down the call and stormed out of the conference room. I was absolutely livid. After repeatedly being told that I needed the attributes to this data, after being chastised and fussed on previous calls for not doing this, the subcontractor still didn't think what I was asking for was important. What the ever-loving real man, not going to say this about the entire general profession, but there are clearly some engineers out there that are, well, morons. Yuck and porter out of fabric directions on the hill, PNG. I took another walk around the headquarters building to soothe the anger boiling in my blood. I came back into 2 missed calls from Ryan. I called him back a few minutes later. I'm sorry, but I laid into him. I asked him what was going on here. Why did his subcontractor not think attribution was important? Why were we constantly missing so much data that had been promised to me? Why was it such a piss poor output? Ryan was apologetic. He merely said he'd try to get to the bottom of this. On my end, I saw no end in sight here, at least in terms of getting a good output from and her co. So I turned to my legal team. I wanted to know what my options were. We sat down with the agreement and dove into it in detail. As I came to find out, there were loopholes that I hadn't realized when I first put this together. I had asked $NERCO for a GIS data model, and that was airtight. I had also asked for the GIS data produced by this project to be imported into that data model. But crucially, I had not specifically defined GIS data in the agreement. I didn't specifically indicate that it meant populating the attribution. I tried to argue with my legal team that this was implied if you're creating a data model and then creating the GIS data to reside within it. Didn't that implicitly mean you were filling out those fields? But my legal team said that I had to have that written out clearly. Without it, there was leeway for the contractor to argue their way out of that responsibility. God, do I hate legal contracts. I hate engineering firms that try to weasel their way out of doing good work even more, though. From what my legal folks were telling me, I was without a leg to stand on. My hands were tied. $NERCO had to give me geometric data that met my standards, but they effectively did not need to give me one lick of attribute data. By COB that same day, $Ryan got back to me with some insights into what had happened. As it turns out, $subcontractor never originally understood that their output needed to be exported into GIS at all. More to the point, they did not have any GIS expertise at their firm in any way, nor did they even know how to populate the attributes. They simply sent their CAD, DWGS off to $NERCO, where the staff there, principally $NUCAD, would simply append it to what he thought was the appropriate feature in the data model. Moreover, $NUCAD was true to his name, brand new to the field. He'd never worked in a professional capacity before, and he was cutting his teeth on an extremely demanding project that he was woefully ill-equipped for. On top of all this, remember how I said that $NERCO had been bought out all those months ago? In the wake of the buyout, tons of staff had fled to greener pastures. Many of those staff members had been involved in this project, particularly on the QA/QC side of things. When the primary quality review staff left my project, they effectively had nobody reviewing it for months prior to it being delivered to me. Jesus. Honestly, these issues with the output were Ryan's fault. He was the project manager. He should have had a better handle on things and what was happening here. I didn't cut him any slack when I talked to him about this, though I didn't raise my voice or try to be outright mean to him. He was my friend after all. But so much was my fault too. I shouldn't have compromised on a cheaper subcontractor when we first set up the project. I probably should have put this up for a competitive bid. I should not have trusted an untested entity with a project of such importance and value. I certainly was to take all these things to heart. Eventually, I just told Ryan reservedly that what they had provided to me would have to suffice. I wanted them to stop working on it and just give me what they had. He insisted that they could give me a more useful output, but I honestly was just tired of working with them on this. I felt like we were just throwing good money in after bad, and the next output would be just as disappointing. Real, with the amount of time and effort we'd spent on this already, I probably could have created half the data that they'd worked on these past many months myself, without needing to pay a dime extra anyway. I sent him a letter of completion. I told them to cease work. Ryan wouldn't give it up though. He wound up having one of his other GIS team members, someone with much more experience and a better handle over data management, take a stab at completing one of the features I'd mentioned was in particularly sorry shape. This analyst used the resource I'd sent and did his best to populate all the attributes for me. Ryan then sent it off to me. I looked at it, and honestly it was quite decent. I sent Ryan my thanks. And I knew that NERCO wanted to be able to build all the assets for the other campuses at some point. Ryan asked me to use this new data I'd received as the example for what they could do going forward. I let him know that I'd consider it. I had to pay the piper though. I needed to speak to my boss, Distinguished, to let him know the results of everything. I scheduled a meeting with him a few days after I spoke with Ryan. Distinguished asked me what had happened through the project. I was honest with him. I said that the company had really only given us decent geometry. They hadn't done any of the attribution that was the heart and soul of what actually made this GIS data. Distinguished raised his eyebrow, asking me how this was any different from the CAD information we had in our DWGS. I shook my head and said, admittedly, that it wasn't much different at all. I then proceeded to show him the new data I'd received recently from the more experienced analysts. It was far more complete and looked to be at a decent standard of quality. I wasn't fighting for dollar an acre, but I let dollar distinguished know that if this was the kind of output I could expect in the future, I'd be more inclined to continue working with them. Dollar distinguished just shook his head and told me that whoever I decided to go with was ultimately my decision. I got back to my desk and looked at the mess I would have to untangle, correct, and complete before it was usable. I sent Dollar Ryan an email letting him know that my leadership wouldn't blacklist his company if I wanted to continue working with them, but for now, I needed to wait until I had gotten everything workable from what had been delivered to me. And this would take me months, probably years, possibly before I could get back to them on the next sites. Dollar Ryan sent me an email saying he understood. From there, I set aside any thoughts of working with Dollar and Airco for the time being and got to work fixing data. Several months later, I got a contact from Dollar Ryan out of the blue. He wanted to showcase our project as a success at some upcoming conference. I spoke to him later that day about it. I bold-faced told him that this project had not been a success by any stretch of the word and that I was not okay presenting on it as such. Humble, he thanked me for my time and I didn't hear any more about it. At the end of the calendar year, after I had been working on this data for months and now had some other vendors in my stables vendors that seemed to have their heads screwed on significant data, I got an email from Dollar Ryan once more. He wanted to know when we would be looking into getting the GIS inventory set up for our other campuses. I went to my leadership once more. In a time since, Dollar Distinguished had retired and was replaced by Dollar the Gentleman. Dollar the Gentleman had a very level head on his shoulders, but he was also very much about getting actionable results. One of the things I like about him, this attitude reflects my own. I told him about all the issues we'd had in the previous project. He asked me what my gut feeling was. I thought about it for a moment, then answered him honestly. We had plenty of better options now. It seemed like Dollar and Airco didn't really know what they were doing, and I didn't want to work with the company any longer. Dollar the Gentleman nodded and told me to make the call. So I did. I spoke to Dollar Ryan in one of the conference rooms. I let him know that my old boss had retired and I had a new one. We had discussed everything surrounding the previous contract and had come to the conclusion that we would prefer to go with other options now. Dollar Ryan protested, asking if this was something he could speak to my boss about to try to persuade him to see differently. I gave him a pained look and said, "Dollar me, this was my call, Dollar Ryan. I'm sorry." Dollar Ryan's face fell and he nodded. "Dollar Ryan, I see. Well, let me know if you need us to help you out with something else in the future." We then hung up. I remember hanging out in that conference room for a long time. A broken friendship, a worthless output, hundreds of thousands of dollars wasted, countless hours spent fruitlessly. I shook my head. I hated what this had meant for my relationship with a good friend, someone I'd known for years. I hated what it might mean for my continued employment here at the Dollar facility. I had been in charge of this. What kind of fallout was on its way? But these things happen. These are the conversations that have to be had sometimes. Everyone fails. I guess the measure of us is in how we pick ourselves back up afterwards. And there was still work to be done. Tomorrow you'll find out what. Here are some of my other stories on TFDS, if you're interested. The Dollar Facility Series, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4, Part 5, Part 6, Part 7, Part 8, Part 10, Part 11, Part 12, Part 13, Part 14. Mr. Cartographer's Atlas, Volume 9.